Well, hello and welcome to this session on creative process innovation, part of XpoNorth 2022. And XpoNorth, as you know, is a creative industries conference and convention that usually based in Inverness and still based in Inverness, but happening virtually this year as it has done the 2 years through the pandemic, and that allows us to reach out to fascinating people all over the world. And innovation is very much part of the DNA of Expo North, and as a pan creative industries uh, event and also all year round development program, the way that we create and the what we do with that creative work and the innovations on how it's made and what we do with it are very important to us all. And so I'm delighted to be discussing that topic today with three guests. I'm really pleased could join us, Caroline, Crispin, and Helen. I'm going to pass over to them in a moment, and we'll go through various talking points, and we'll see how we get on uh, with with this rich topic that I'm sure we could talk about for a long time. I'm Dougal Perman, sector specialist with Expo North, and I also run a content company in our ear, and I'm chair of Music Trade Body, the Scottish Music Industry Association, and I work across the creative industries in lots of different ways. But let's meet our guests. And Caroline, can you introduce yourself, please, and give us a bit of an overview of the projects you work on and or the companies you work with.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline Parkinson. I'm Sector Engagement Manager for the Creative Industries at Edinburgh Futures Institute. And I also volunteer to support the MOVE Summit, Scotland's Animation and VFX Summit. And I guess the main project that people will be aware that I work with is Creative Informatics. And so you can check that out. There's another year or possibly longer to run. And hopefully people in the room or the virtual room have been engaging with creative informatics in various ways. So that's the project I mostly work with. Obviously, we're also building Edinburgh Futures Institute, and in a way that's a project. And the building will open next summer, and we started work regardless of whether we're in or out of the building, and new programs have been written and are launched. So that's actually, I guess, the day job, the main project. And so that's really what I'm working on. So my role is to work with you in the industry to help you with your skills needs, your research ambitions, and your innovation that you'd like to see realised in your business or in your culture organisation or in your practice, and to help enable that in any way that we can. So that's really my role.
Great, thank you. Crispin, can you introduce yourself and tell us what you've been working on, who you're working with?
Hi there. I'm Crispin Parry. I run an arts development agency called British Underground, and we really specialise in showcasing or I guess promoting UK talent at international showcases. And that the history of that really, we started about maybe over 20 years ago at an event called South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. At a time when I guess international showcasing wasn't a kind of main feature topic of culture. I mean, we didn't do a lot of that at that point. And along with agencies, sort of government agencies and trade bodies like BPI, we created a UK showcase for South by Southwest. And over time, I guess we built things like a space called the British Music Embassy there, which was a piece of real estate which hosted artists from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England in one place. We actually kind of stepped away from that a little bit and are more now associated with more specialist work from kind of grime and jazz and maybe heavy metal, getting into genres from the UK rather than just UK nations or other kind of broader themes. But that's working really well, and we've worked with people like Stormzy and going way back, people like Amy Winehouse. But it's a great place to do work at South by, and out from that we started building projects and showcase programs at things like Womex, just come back from Folk Alliance, which was a hybrid event, which I'm sure I'll talk about a little bit later on, and Classical Next, where we co-produced the opening ceremony, the opening gala there in Hanover with an organisation called Black Lives in Music. So we do lots in that space, and more recently in the last few years, a project called Future Art and Culture, which looks at technology in the arts and culture sector and showcases work from that space in VR and AR and XR, specifically at South by Southwest within a couple of programs they run there. But it really is at the cutting edge of how you can promote and create art within the digital space. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of that later on, I'm sure, as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Helen, tell us a bit about yourself and the amazing project you're working on at the moment, especially.
Sure. So my name is Helen Scarlett O'Neill, and I am an interaction designer and producer, creating participatory experiences. And my most recent project is with Story Futures Academy, a project called Story Trails, which is led by David Olusoga, the historian. And we are working on a strand which is mobile augmented reality.
And you're going to get to show us a bit of that but later on. And I think there's a lot to unpack in there. Great, well, thank you. We were talking before we started this session a bit about all the different ways that we're seeing technology being used and that we're using it ourselves at the moment. But Caroline, if I could start with you, like in the work that you do, especially across different networks, and you I didn't mention also you ran a brilliant conference at the end of March, Creative Tech Scotland Gathering, which brought together creative people and technologists, and in a very exciting way, I thought. I really enjoyed going to that. And we saw some really interesting innovations in tech at that event. But how do you see technology being used currently in the creative industries?
Yeah, thanks for that. Actually, I shall talk a little bit about CTSG, as I call it. But yeah, Edinburgh Futures Institute is a data-driven innovation hub. So data is obviously the first thing that I see people using, and that's my, if you like, day job. But obviously that is data-driven, so it engages into many, many things, many tools. And so I'm seeing a whole raft of tools being used in digital, creative tech, data-driven innovation. So we're seeing people use chatbot and cryptocurrencies and blockchain and creative cred, machine learning and AI, Internet of Things, obviously AR, VR, mixed reality, 364K filming, robotics and fashion, and also looking at haptics and robotic touch. So Touch Lab are working on that, and Anarchic 3D, and Applied Arts Scotland through the Distance Project are looking at distance collaboration and use of haptic feedback, photogrammetry and 3D scanning, LiDAR, audio and sound triggered things, and creating with sound design. Obviously other things as well that are a bit more performative. So I'm starting to see people move into how they can use digital and creative tech integrated with their craft or with their music or whatever it may be, with their performance. So I think during COVID we were all playing with and harnessing digital and maybe lived a little bit too much in digital maybe, because I'm starting to see people kind of going, right, what can I keep from that phase and pull into being more face-to-face with people and doing things in exhibition or audience engagement or performance or working together with someone else. What can we bring into the, if you like, a tangible combination? So I'm starting to see people working with each other using the tech. And so that's really interesting to watch, and I'm looking forward to how that will move forward. And as you saw at Creative Tech Scotland gathering, people were using the tech in various ways. So you had Ray Interactive with Mark Daniels creating Atmosphere OS, which is a data-driven and creative tech sensor-enabled, triggered film experience. So you're watching a film and things in the film sequence are triggering a real atmospheric reaction, wind or another sound or whatever it may be. And obviously they're experimenting with how they could make that an immersive experience using Atmosphere OS. And there was Drake Music Scotland, who demonstrated making music through all the different devices they've developed to help people with locked-in syndrome and various disabilities to make music, including making music with their eyes, which was totally blowing everybody away. So that's just a couple of examples. I mentioned the Distance Project. They were there with an Arctic 3D and Touch Lab. I put them all in one room since they all relate to touch. And I'm hoping that maybe a collaboration might come out of even putting them all in the one room. But people are starting to bring the tools together with what they want to do in their creative practice or in their business. So that's what I'm starting to see.
Great, yeah, thanks. I mean, I think there was some fascinating stuff being demoed and even used at your event. The Unity 3D gaming game authoring platform being used as a
Yes,
great live demo live on stage to show how you can use it to make live action animation, essentially to make animation using live actors
yes,
was really exciting. But I think what really captured, yeah, a lot of
yeah,
imagination and really amazed me was what was happening in music tech. Especially there was some cool coding for kids,
yes,
kind of like music making through coding through using real
yes.
world objects and put like whether that's maybe build.
That was the Lego
Yeah,
enabled playable tech
yeah,
by Ben Shogler, playable tech.
yeah,
And that was fantastic how children can put the Lego pieces on and the various intervals create the pitch and rhythm difference, and then you can add others, drums and bass and so forth, and they could actually make music by playing with Lego, which is just a fantastic thing. It's called Beat Blocks.
yeah, yeah. That was really exciting, and yeah, the Drake stuff, Drake Music Scotland, who've been pioneers for a long time in the use of technology,
They have,
working with people with a whole range of different disabilities and different abilities, and
yes,
the sight piano, the what iPiano, I can't remember the name of it, but
yeah,
difficult to get the hang of, but actually after using it even for a short time, you can start to literally see how it's used. By it's tracking the motion of your eyes and then triggering notes accordingly, and that was wonderful, as well as some other apparently look quite simple innovations with a lot going on behind the scenes to enable people who couldn't might have
absolutely.
significant mobility issues to perform. Um, Crispin,
Yeah, and I think it's harnessing all that tech and bringing it together. That is the key, isn't it now?
yeah, yeah, and using it productively. And Crispin, you've talked to me in the past about some of the innovations that you've seen showcased in music and in audio more widely. But what have you seen recently, or what has caught your eye currently?
So I think the gaming world is really interesting, and you're seeing it, I think, post-pandemic, or maybe during the pandemic, coming closer to some of the things that we might do in culture and the arts. And I'm going to take you back a couple of years to when Lil Nas X performed on the Roblox platform. Now, not many people, I guess, in our world will have seen that. I mean, it's quite a famous story now, and I believe at the time it did pick up views of around 30 million. Actually, people actually witnessed that, and I was one of those people. But I got to see that because my 11-year-old twins, who would have been probably 10 at the time, were on that platform, seeing how it worked. It's an open world, I guess, metaverse style platform, and you have an avatar and you can play games, build worlds, and do what you like. And that was, it's used a lot by kids, and it's a really interesting space to see what the future of that kind of thing, what they're calling the metaverse, might be, because a lot of the development is being done there. And my kids are native in that world. They buy their t-shirts, they buy their currency, they buy their real estate there, and they see that as no different to buying a t-shirt. In fact, they prefer to do that than to buy a real t-shirt from a shop. It does cost money that we as parents have to provide through an exchange of Robux. But I saw that show there, and I just thought, well, wow, at some point that's going to hit my world of showcasing. And we were still in lockdown at the time, and I was planning the South by Southwest. I guess it was an online show, and a talk to the programmer within their XR space, their kind of digital space that they were building. And he said, well, can you find some music that really shows off this kind of technology? And he said, we'll help you build it. We'll help you put a platform to put that on. So I kind of explored that, and we did end up creating a 3D avatar for the South by Southwest XR platform, built around the tuba player Theon Cross, and it's an amazing. There are videos of it, and I would seek it out. But we think it's one of the first sort of showcasing avatars to ever be built. Certainly the first tuba playing avatar ever to be built, and this was a couple of years ago now. So it was before that avatar building was really something you could just go onto a program and do yourself. You needed to be a specialist. We had a big team build that avatar, but it was a really useful experience to see what some of the future might be like. And I know we're much more aware of the metaverse and avatars and what that kind of story and how that story is developing now. And I still think we're in the foothills. We haven't really quite figured out, certainly within the cultural space, what the metaverse might mean to us in a few years' time, and maybe we can talk about some of that on this discussion. But yeah, it was really interesting seeing Roblox, and it's kind of the other things like Fortnite and Minecraft. They are where the sort of future users of our world, the future population, the future kind of people who will be making the culture and the art, that's going to be their experience. They're going to know what that is. And I think it's really useful within this discussion to be aware of that. And I mean, there is some, a sort of slight snobbiness around games, but actually have a look at those things. They're very accessible, and they are the places where a lot of this culture will be built. And so we do need to be aware of what they are. Again, we might talk a little bit about that later on. And I did get lucky enough to meet one of the directors from Roblox at South by Southwest this year, and we did talk a lot about where they're going, and they are building programs for music makers and artists now, so that those things will be embedded in their world. So yeah, that's just a little reflection on where we're at right now.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's so much potential there in these virtual worlds that they are worlds. There's of course there's a marketplace there. There's opportunity to perform, to engage, to interact there. Helen, you before we started this, you were talking a bit about those worlds as well. But how are you using technology in your own creative practice at the moment?
Sure. So I'm going to show you some stuff because that's probably the best way to describe
Yeah.
what I'm doing at the moment. But I should have probably in my introduction mentioned a little bit where my background was, because that really has influenced where I've ended up in terms of tech. And what Caroline was saying in terms of, how do you bring the real world and the tech together? That's definitely what I'm trying to do in this project. So my background is what you might say in immersive theatre. So site-specific immersive theatre, to be precise.
Yeah.
So creating worlds that are layered across existing sites in a meaningful way. So for example, secret cinema productions, both the digital pre-narratives and the physical experiences, finding buildings that work for them, finding artists that can build parts of those worlds to kind of put us in dialogue with the cultural artifact in our modern times with what's going on now. So we did Terry Gillingham's Brazil in Croydon in the tallest building, which was a BT block, and it was right across from the Home Office at the time of the hostile environment, and it was, we really enjoyed kind of bringing that modern layer to the cultural artifact and to the physical site. I also worked with the National Trust and the National Archives to bring hidden histories to life on the locations in which they happened. So that included Suffragette City, which we did in Piccadilly Circus, and it was a recreation of the recruitment and deployment and training of militant suffragettes during the window smashing campaign, which took place in Piccadilly Circus. And that was using recreated archival artifacts, both in the digital world and in the physical world. So this project, which is led by David Olasoga, is very much about also bringing hidden histories to life. And one thing I think that tech has really brought us to is decentralizing and democratizing how we look at museum culture and archive, who's a creator, where those places have to be, and who can access them. So essentially, we're making augmented reality trails in 15 locations across the UK, with creatives in each location. The two that are in Scotland are Dundee and Dumfries. And I'm actually going to show you a wee bit of Lambeth, because that's what I've been working on today, because we're right in the thick of production. I'm not going to show you the finished product because we're not at that stage yet. I'm going to show you some of the programs that we use in order to get there. And actually, what I'm going to show you first is something in Reality Composer. And it's actually built by our creative in Dundee, Duncan Cowles, but for Patricia Lala, who's our creative in Lambeth. Let me just find the right window. So this is a scan outside of Brixton Library. And if I just press play, you can see that the real world, we've added objects to it. And the technology, basically we're working with Nexus, who are working with Niantic's location mapping and placing technology. And if I stop sharing for a second, hope you guys all saw that okay. Essentially, we're using Scaniverse, which is now readily available on Apple phones. You can go out and scan, and so there are 50 librarians across the country and our creatives who've been trained to use this in order to capture physical locations, which we can then layer virtual elements across, including archive from the BBC and the BFI and our various partners, so that you can go to that site. You can hold your phone up essentially, and you'll see the virtual scan will just basically snap into position, and all you will see is what's been layered on top of it, and you can walk around it and interact with it as if they're real objects in this actual space. You can also view it at home as a diorama and just pinch to size the scale of the environment which you're putting into your living room or on your kitchen table or whatever. So what you saw there is Reality Composer, which is how we get part of the editorial process done in terms of spatializing the content. It then would go to the developer so that they could put it into Unity and build it in there. But the next stage, which I'm going to show you, is actually the stage before Reality Composer, which is an editorial program called Descript. So a lot of the creatives that we're working with have a background in documentary filmmaking, and we're launching the Story Trails project at Sheffield Docfest on the 26th of this month. So this is Patricia Lala in Lambeth, and this program is essentially a scripting program which we're using to try and represent what information is given when the audience trigger certain objects within the 3D environment. So I'll just play a little bit of it to give you some idea.
Hello, I'm calling about your application to be a roadie. Well, congratulations, you've got the job. Your musical artist is Winifred Atwell. I haven't got time to give you the full lowdown, but see what you can glean from that radio. Then check in at the old piano over there for your first day on the job. I'll fill you in later. Go on, tap to tune it.
So I'll just stop sharing it there. It gives you the idea. It's essentially a scripting tool, and that plus Reality Composer gives our developers what they need in order to build these experiences.
Cool. Thanks very much for that. So you're building it's script based, but you're building it as an interactive experience. So the user, the audience member, can take it in different directions. So it's not strictly linear. Is that right?
This actually is a linear journey. So the interactions are to do with how the audience navigate the space and they can input into it. So there are some elements that we call hope notes, which essentially is allowing for the audience to input information into the trail at one point, which comes back at them in another point as part of an installation, which adds a layer of understanding to that current point in the story. So we are still, it's interactive to a certain extent at this point, but it is linear storytelling as well. But the approach in all of the trails is very much about the audience journey. So it's not about giving them information, it's about them uncovering information as they go.
What part of it, because like with your background in immersive theatre and this kind of storytelling, I completely understand how you can create something like this and make this world. But how has the technology that you're using enabled the project? What has it opened up things that you wouldn't have been able to do without that tech?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that it's enabling is a layering of moments in time, which is something that I'm very interested in as somebody who loves working with archive. I really love that you can go to a place and have another moment in that place layered over the top of it through video footage, through archival material. For example, if there was a protest in a square, you could put that protest back in the square. If it's video footage of that protest, you could use machine learning to extrude it in 3D so that you could walk around it in that same space. I think there's something really powerful about walking in the footsteps of people that have gone before us and trying to tune into that moment in time and what they're feeling through the actions that you're taking to engage with the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting how you're using evocative audio that's the dramatized audio, great sound design, with these visual interactive tools as well, and lovely archive pieces. Um, how do you think technology is helping the creative process in terms of removing obstacles and refining workflows, refining the way things are done? Crispin, is this something that you've seen much evidence of?
I think the interesting thing about where we are now, and we're still obviously trying to figure out fully what the world looks like for culture and the arts kind of post-pandemic, but I mean you can get a sort of sense of where it might be going at the moment. And I think what's interesting, the pandemic forced us to think about ways of doing our work where we might be in one location and we needed to get whatever art we were making to somebody else. And there were already tools and processes and ways of doing that. But actually this forced us to really look at how we might do that. So as a producer of real world showcases that happened in various spaces around the world, we clearly couldn't do that anymore. One of the things that we had been looking at as a sort of an arts agency, trying to figure out new ways of getting our or the work of artists out to people, was looking at video. And actually during the pandemic, well, we have to do this now. And I think one of the things that was interesting is there were early on people that'd get the guitar or their piano or whatever it was, and they'd put their computer on and they would film themselves. And that was seen as sort of good enough for where we were at that point. And actually it did enable communication. It did enable people to connect and collaborate. But as time went on, and Netflix production, and people got much more used to watching a lot more telly with much better high production values, and there was a lot more demand. People became more demanding, I think, and I think we responded to that by really trying to make much more, I guess, documentary style showcases where you would actually add a lot more context into the story. So we did a big showcase with an organisation called Jazz Refreshed, and we thought, well, how do we make this something that resonates to our American colleagues who would recognise that not only are we here doing this in a venue, but they'll know that venue and they'll know it's an important and something to be, it's an important place and something to be cherished as they watch it. So we filmed the whole thing in Abbey Road Studios, which of course was known to Americans. So that became one of the parts of the story. And the experience of those artists, very new artists, going into that very famous place that had a lot of history. Some of the artists didn't know any of the history, which was great too. But a lot of that history, they were able to articulate through their stories of what they, how they responded to it. And then their music was part of that as well. So making much more narrative-based showcasing was really good. And actually we got to a point at the end of this year where we've started to make sort of documentary showcase films that accompany the live showcase now. And at the event we've just done in Folk Alliance in Kansas City, we delivered the keynote, even though the film was shown to a packed venue in the hotel room, the conference room in Kansas City. It was filmed in somebody's house, and we packaged it up and edited it really nicely, showed it, and it was screened to a big audience outside that room, but also the audience in the room had a communal experience as well. So we're starting to figure out this sort of stuff. I'm not sure we're 100% certain as to what it is yet, but definitely the combination of things that can be done online, the avatar projects I talked about before, and ways of bringing people into the room to watch somebody do something live. These, I think, particularly with the environment and ideas around that being important to explore as well. We've been forced to have to address this, and this is where we're going right now. It's a sort of a hybrid way of thinking, but I don't think we're at the end of that thought process yet. But it's really useful to have gone through that, and actually we're making some new things.
And I think that's really interesting, that the way that process has evolved, and you're taking bits of what worked well during the way we had to do things in the height of the pandemic, and combining that with what you want to do in the real world, and sometimes that's technology driven, and sometimes actually that's just about the way that you execute the experience, the way you bring it to life, the way that you design it. And that will continue to evolve, I guess, as we, sort of find our feet with this new.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dougal. Yeah, I think people are trying to think to themselves, okay, we did a lot of experimentation. I guess at that point, it was about bringing ourselves to our audience with our creative expression, and we weren't so worried about, can we monetize this? How do we protect it, etc. But then there was the benefits. Okay, I'm traveling less. This is good for the climate and environmental impact and carbon offsets. And as you know, the music industry were interested in that. Dougal, because I think the SMIA have been talking about hybridization, and can we retain some of the benefits for access for people and being able to enjoy it if you can't make it to the gig, and also the secondary income from being able to watch something digitally, so I might be able to buy a digital ticket if I can't make it to wherever to see whoever. So, that was also, how can we retain that? And so in terms of creating something that would allow that, people started to explore, okay, is the audience ready for that? What's the value for that? How much do you charge for that? And also, who owns the broadcasts and who owns the performance? And how do you pay the artist appropriately for the second part? And then if you were to play it again later, is there a charge for that to the audience member, and is there a payment to the artist and the venue, and who shares it, and what's the actual fair split of that? Now, all these questions were being asked of people who were thinking about doing it, and the FNR in Eindhoven took it further and took their isolation sessions and looked at the artist owning the broadcast, because the venue took the view that I hire a band, so to speak, and they go on the stage, it's ephemeral, they play, I can't keep it, there's nothing to retain, it's in everyone's memories. So and I pay them a fee and we're all happy, yeah? So they say, well, if there's no performance, there's no venue, there's no gig. So as far as I'm concerned, the artist should own their performance. And so in that case, there's a royalty to them, there's a fee to them, and it's a different model. It's more like the broadcast model. And they looked at the IP and how digital payments could be made, how the broadcast is recognised, protected and paid, and the artist remunerated quickly. So they were looking at all of that. That platform, they now want to white label and make it available. So this is interesting that people have been trying to look at solving it. Other things that people were looking at is exhibition online and how you might enjoy a 3D immersive exhibition. And I thought some of the platforms that came out during the pandemic to allow you to do that yourself were pretty fascinating. In terms of your first question around creative workflow and process, I think at Creative Informatics I've seen a lot of practitioners and innovators and cultural organisations thinking about gaps and how we can shorten certain processes and fill gaps. And so we're seeing a lot of people applying their minds to shortening that creative process. And you've got Stageport, early resident entrepreneur, 3D scanning venues so that people had a digital venue replica, and then that could be used by touring companies to design their set for that venue ahead of time. And so if every venue had that, that could enable touring. Black Goblin Audio, looking at how visual artists and people who are maybe not familiar with sound are starting to use sound and make their own tracks, and how can they simplify that with their audio plugin system that they're creating and making that accessible for visual artists and so on. So I'm seeing creatives thinking about other creatives and creative process, and Centerline creating a touring system, a database touring system, and then Scotty creating a ticketing and marketing system for theatre, and Social Convention creating a performance platform. And then all three of them realising in beta, we could maybe join these up and make it into one system for performing arts. So it's great to see creatives thinking about other creatives and creating solutions for them.
Yeah, because that helps push things forwards. And there's just endless potential with that, really. But it's about what is going to be genuinely useful and help move things forwards. Helen, what do you think in terms of processes that removing obstacles and making it easier for things to get done?
Well, obviously the big one that's been removed is distance in a way, especially on this project. Working across 15 locations with people I hadn't met in real life until literally a few weeks ago. I've been working with them for a year, just in a very intense way, exploring new ways of working, and then seeing everyone in real life for the first time. Such a kind of an emotional relief, but the fact is that we managed to work completely remotely, learning new skills together, training, testing. It's really just incredible how we can work in such a deeply connected way across great distances now. and that's the major blocker, I suppose, that has opened up. A project doesn't have to be in one location anymore. It can happen almost simultaneously across different locations. You can be thinking about projects that are global even. So that's very exciting for me, especially as someone whose practice has been very site-based. I think it's been a bit the case of the good, the bad and the ugly in terms of processes go, and in terms of ease of processes. So obviously remote working has been pretty incredible. But then when it comes to new technologies, there are some processes that definitely need smoothing out. And again, as Caroline was saying, realizing that some systems could be joined up and it would be a lot better and easier for future creatives. We're definitely coming across moments like that. We're like, wow, why is this going to America and we're waiting 3 days for X to happen? There's definitely flows that can be improved. So maybe not so much the bad, but some of the ugly, especially like getting from Descript, which is one of the programs that I showed earlier, into other programs. It's wonderful as a visual tool for conveying information, but if you want to get that information out of it into another program, they keep updating Descript every single day, but it's very much a work in progress, and we're constantly encountering bugs and issues. So it feels like kind of a brave new world in that regard, in terms of how those technologies work or don't work yet, and how they could be better joined up to refine our processes. So yeah, to be continued, I think.
And in terms of the what's possible, is there anything that you've used or that you're using that makes it possible for you to do things that were previously impossible? For instance, for me, in my content production company, we've been amazed by some of the tools that we've got now that use AI to do things like upscale images or increase the resolution of video, or with really really effective audio restoration or emulation, and then things like the I mentioned that I'd seen at Caroline's conference, the creating animation in a live action way, or working with live people to manipulate avatars. Is there anything that you use, Helen, that wouldn't have been possible previously?
I think the tech that has excited me most, apart from this mobile scanning being accessible to everyone in the way it can snap into place and you can walk around, mixed reality environments, I'd say that the most impressive technology that we work with that's more specific than that is the machine learning applied to archive video. There's something really beautiful and unnerving about scenes coming to life in 3D through machine learning. There's some, I think I mentioned if there was a protest in the square, you could put it back in there. There's some footage that we're not using for various editorial reasons, but it is of a protest, and that's the first one that I saw tested with the machine learning extrusion. And you could see the tactics of the police and the crowd in the scene really emphasized when it was drawn out into space, and you just felt connected to the logistics and emotions of the space in a very different way when it was extruded in 3D. So that surprised me, and I found that was quite exciting. And it's one of those technologies.
Well, yeah, or how's that manifest then?
How does it work?
You've got the original archive clip, and then the machine learning creates a 3D model based on it.
Mm-hmm. It's a wee bit simpler than that. It's essentially the program has learned how to differentiate from foreground, midground, background, and that tracks objects throughout the film footage in those regards. So it makes a guess, and usually it's right, sometimes it's not, and it's quite hilarious. But it makes a guess and then it applies it to the whole footage. And what you get essentially, because we're putting it into a 3D space, is it stretches out like a light ray. It's kind of almost like putting the film footage back to reality. So in the same way the light bounces off of objects in 3D space and forms the footage, we're kind of trying to reverse it and put the people back out there. So you get everyone spatialized back into the space with these pretty cool kind of stretchy light beams in between the bits that it can't quite figure out. So you can walk around people, but they don't have a backside, if you know what I mean. Because that wasn't filmed. But it's kind of like if you've seen Minority Report, the way the film footage in that is spatialized when the investigator's looking at evidence. Also reminds me of Detroit Become Human, if anyone's played that. There's a crime scene mode where you can recreate the crime scene that happened there with these extruded figures in space. Yeah, it feels pretty futuristic. I think it's one of the things within the project that looks like we're pushing the boundaries. It's almost struggling on the edge of
Very cool.
possibility
Yeah,
there.
I look forward to seeing some of that. Caroline, what about you? Have you seen any examples of making the previously impossible possible?
I still am amazed by the live capture into animated background, you know, the 364K studio, and you can see live action and then drop it into Unity and put it in an animated background, or as you say, create an avatar from it, and then loving seeing Chagall in her performance triggering her avatar at the same time as triggering her music using the Mimu gloves and using her body sensors to trigger other effects, and she's got a motion capture camera triggering other things, and so the whole thing is I don't know how she does it. It's like her brain and her fingers are all completely connected as a trigger on different things, and then she added drones, and so drones were actually moving as well. So I think that it's that sort of thing that makes me just get the goosebumps. And in a more practical way, the thing that I would love to see happen, and it's possible, it's just not connected yet, is things like fashion design that can then is seen. You can see it in AR, so you can see the fabric move and everything. That's possible, and you can have a fashion show like that. Then you could take it to VR, where I could try that on. Oh, okay, and then buying it. Okay, that still has the same transaction, if you like. If we can move that to remote printing, where you have a design, it can be printed or 3D printed or created close to your locale, then it travels this tiny distance to get to you because it's already designed digitally, transferred digitally, printed digitally, and so you can imagine remote production. And you could then apply that to furniture making and all sorts of things where a design could be designed somewhere but it's made elsewhere. And just trying to look at the circular economy and things like that. So I think that there's still things that, there's pockets, as Helen was saying, like there's things that the technologies are there, but they need the connections or the business model is maybe not quite there. So, but these are the two things that really interest me.
Yeah, thanks. Crispin, is there anything that you've seen that is intriguing in that way?
I have to say I'm always kind of blown away as soon as anything, even minor, comes my way. I think technology is extraordinary. We sort of are in an interesting time for it now as well. I guess, I've been working I worked primarily in music and then shifted very quickly into the kind of hardcore of technology in AR and XR and VR and AI, and all of those initials all kind of hit me really hard. But I ended up being very lucky to work with some of the best of that within the art. So things like Dream, the RSC production that was a virtual reality live production that happened. Again, another pandemic-inspired project, I think, but very large scale and very much at the very forefront of what is likely to happen in that space. So I don't think, you're not going to get many of those coming along at once right now, but those are the projects that are going to, I guess, write the story of what's coming next.
Yeah.
So I don't deal, or I don't work necessarily within the programs. I'm just watching and supporting how those programs help artists. But I think within all of this technology, it feels like we're still in the very early days of it kind of coming together properly. Certainly being adopted by the majority of the population, and outside of my work, not very many people are comfortable with headsets and are really that aware of what's happening in VR and AR and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a long way to go till we get it. I mean, and maybe we need to abandon headsets for all of that to really happen, and things. The interactivity needs to come from somewhere else, perhaps, and the immersion needs to come from somewhere else. And I think phones and watches and glasses will probably take on some of that in the future. But these are just my hunches as I see what happens, around me. But I think we're in a really interesting time, and I think we don't need to get too distracted by the metaverse, because I think a lot of that is made up. We may already be in that anyway. But I know one of your questions, Dougal, I'm not sure if you're coming onto it yet, is what are the dangers of some of this, or what are some of the warnings that we should be aware of? But it would be interesting to talk about that, because I think, I work with real live performers, real live artists, craftspeople, people who work in culture, and it's their work that we're really interested in supporting. And all of the technology helps that. It isn't the work that we're supporting. That is there to create those works and help bring them to life, but it is not the thing we're interested in. So technology, throughout history, is there from lighting to a stage to a whatever it might be, is there to support those artists. And I think we can easily get distracted by Silicon Valley's kind of really hyper way. The hyperbole around technology can sometimes be quite overwhelming. And actually, I think we do need to always put the artist first in that conversation, certainly from where we stand. So one of the warnings is not to take the Silicon Valley version of where we sit right now in the world too seriously, and explore what's good about
really
it and reject
point.
what we don't need.
And just remembering the humanity of it, isn't keeping the artist front and center, and not getting carried away for technology for the sake of it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about what about when technology isn't the answer, and or even a cause for concern. Caroline, is that something that you think about, or you've seen?
Yeah, I think about that. I do. I think about that a lot. I know that sort of. I'm going to sound like an old woman, but I remember the analog days, and I worry. I worried about the full digital immersion that happened during COVID. And as a dancer, you're very connected to, I guess, your physical being and your performance space, and it was very difficult to sit still at a computer for 2 years. So I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about data ethics, obviously being in a data project, and how vulnerable we are with our data, actually. And we've obviously seen data manipulation. You don't need me to talk about that. That's a concern I'm sure people have. I'm concerned about the green impact of things. I mean, NFTs, which we haven't mentioned yet, they're obviously emerged and is very fascinating. But are they green? The same issue we have with cryptocurrency and blockchain. I've heard an inventor say, if you don't need to use blockchain, don't use it. So definitely concerned about the green impact. I've seen a recent article around a server that was driven by algae, and it went on and on and on, much longer than they thought it would. And you think, okay, next generation servers, well, literally that would be green streaming. And I guess I'm concerned about, I'm just concerned about everyone thinking that digital is the answer, and it's a tool. This is a tool, and it's just a tool. And we have all these colours in our palette, and we can use all these things and play with them. I think I'm just have that 80s girl mentality of this far and no more. I'm a bit nervous about how far
is
we
too
might
far,
go
Helen,
with it.
do you think, for you or in your experience?
Well, I think before the pandemic, because the pandemic certainly did fully immerse us in the digital world. And I think, especially in terms of interaction potential, a lot of people found it to be lacking in terms of in that regard. And a lot of colleagues before the pandemic were very anti the spread of tech and digital interaction, and wanted to kind of throw it off and go full in on the physical. And I think part of that is also to do with seeing social media and gaming as kind of low forms of interaction. And I think what we learned in the pandemic is that, you know, they can be used in interesting ways, but actually some of the interaction that we do have in digital space is very limited still, and we do need to stretch the potential of what that can mean. And I think, as Crispin was saying about putting the artist in the centre of it, our artists do, I think, need to step up to help push the limits of the technologies that we use, especially those that we use very often on a daily basis and that shape our interactions beyond digital space. I think unless we're pushing the boundaries there, we will end up with the lowest common denominator for our everyday mainstream digital interaction, which I don't think is a good thing. But in terms of overusing tech, because you were talking about style over substance, there's something that Kim Lee at Nexus, who's one of my colleagues on this Story Trails project, says. She says, if you're using tech to do something that couldn't be done any other way, then you're using tech right. And I think that that's a good rule when thinking, should I use something? So that's something that she said that stuck with me, which I definitely like to interrogate.
That's a
tech
great.
use by.
That's a great rule, and a great thing to keep in mind. And actually, you know, that's in line with what you were saying, Crispin, about, you know, keeping the artist at the centre of it. You know, and just making sure that we've got the right intentions, and we're only using the technology to help us move forwards. What well, finally, you know, we'll wrap up in a moment. But is there anything that excites you about future potential? That, you know, coming back around to a more positive way of thinking. You know, what are you excited about next, or what, you know,
Yeah.
what would you like to get your teeth into? Caroline.
I would love to see what we can do now with 5G and performance and outdoor performance and harnessing the power of that and mobile and really doing something, you know, big and pow outdoors. I still get a buzz out of everything that we're all doing. Don't get me wrong, I might have, you know, this voice on my shoulder, but I still get really excited. And I'm still struck in wonder and awe at the things that our creatives do. I still get a complete buzz out of it. So I'm always excited about what they want to do next and try and push my reservations to the back. So I'm excited about what's possible with 5G and outdoor performance. That's really getting me excited. And so I think I'll
Yeah,
probably stick
no, I love
with
that, especially
talking
getting
about that.
outside and and getting into the real world.
Yeah.
Crispin, what are you excited about?
Just sort of going back to the thing we started, or I started talking about, and my kids on Roblox and that sort of space. And I think it's exciting to think that actually the world of gaming, which I think is far, far ahead in a lot of these conversations, particularly in the way that it brings narrative and depth and all sorts of things that perhaps people don't think about within that space. I think the fact that we in the kind of culture and the arts are moving closer to that, I think there is a really interesting space opening up of culture and the arts and gaming, where we have a sort of hybrid kind of entertainment that might be coming down the pipeline. So I'm looking at that space and getting quite excited about it.
Understandably so. And Helen, well, whether it's something you're using or something that you would like to use, or just you're seeing what's exciting for you.
Sure. So James Bennett, who's another colleague of mine, he's the head of Story Futures Academy, which is the parent for Story Trails. He used a term which I really liked yesterday, which was the people's metaverse. Because one of the things that really excites me is accessibility of mobile technologies for people to create and interact directly with things in ways they haven't before. And as I said before, the way that technology decentralizes the way we approach culture, heritage, museums, I think that that's a very exciting future, one where it's everywhere, all around
Brilliant.
us, and we're part of it.
Yeah, that's definitely an exciting future. Well, loads to think about, and lots for hopefully for everyone to take on board there and to get into, um, and so much innovation going on in the creative world and using technology, but also using just different ways of thinking about things, and taking some of the bits that we liked from the way that we were working during lockdowns and so on, and mixing it with getting rid of the stuff we didn't like, and or trying to put that aside anyway, and move away, get away from always being at the screen, or certainly being sedentary at it, and so many amazing projects and activities going on to explore as well. And we'll share some links with people as well, through XpoNorth channels, especially if the of what you're all involved in. But yeah, thank you very much. Thanks very much for joining me, for taking part. Helen, Caroline, Crispin. It's been great having you, and hopefully we can do this kind of thing again in person at some point soon. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dougal.
Yeah,
Great.
thanks, Dougal.
Thank you.